Arthur was a man who lived in the shadows of his own potential. Every morning, at exactly 6:45 a.m., his alarm clock would scream, a piercing sound that felt more like a reminder of his failures than a call to start the day. He lived in a small apartment on the edge of a city that never slept, yet Arthur felt like he had been asleep for years. His life was not bad, but it was not good either. It was simply ordinary. And for Arthur, ordinary had become a prison. He would stand in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at the tired eyes of a 30-year-old man who had once promised to change the world. In his early 20s, Arthur was full of fire. He wanted to write novels, travel the Silk Road, and master 3 different languages. But somewhere between the morning commutes and the endless piles of office paperwork, that fire had turned into cold ashes. He was stuck in a loop of mediocrity. He spent his evenings scrolling through social media, watching other people live the lives he once dreamed of. He felt like a spectator in his own story. The problem wasn't that Arthur didn't try. Every New Year's Eve, he would make massive resolutions. This year, he would say, I will lose 20 kilograms, read 50 books, and start $1 million business. He would start with high energy on January 1st, pushing himself to the limit. But by January 10th, the weight of these massive goals was too much to carry. He would feel exhausted, fail once, and then give up entirely. He was waiting for a big moment, a lightning strike of luck or a sudden burst of superhuman discipline to save him. He believed that to change his life, he needed to make a 180-degree turn in a single day. One rainy Tuesday, while walking home from work, Arthur took a shortcut through a narrow alley he had never noticed before. The rain was cold, soaking through his thin jacket, making him feel even more defeated. He stopped under the roof of a small, dusty bookstore called The Constant Traveler. The window was filled with old clocks and journals. In the center of the display, there was a simple, handwritten sign that caught his eye. It didn't promise wealth or fame. It simply said, You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Arthur felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the rain. He pushed the heavy wooden door, and a small bell chimed. Behind the counter sat an old man with glasses thick as bottle caps, meticulously cleaning a silver pocket watch. He didn't look up, but he spoke in a voice that sounded like shifting gravel. You look like a man who is trying to climb a mountain in a single jump, the old man said. Arthur paused, his hand still on the door handle. I'm just tired of standing at the bottom, he replied, his voice barely a whisper. The old man finally looked up, a small, mysterious smile playing on his lips. The mountain doesn't care about your jump. It only cares about your next inch. Tell me, Arthur, if you could be just 1% better than you were yesterday, would you even notice the difference? Arthur shook his head. 1%? That's nothing. That's a rounding error. That wouldn't change anything. The old man chuckled and put down the pocket watch. That is why you are still at the bottom. You are looking for the explosion, while the world is built on the whisper. The old man, whose nameplate on the desk simply read, Elias, signaled for Arthur to sit down on a velvet chair that looked like it belonged in another century. The air in the shop was thick with the scent of vanilla and ancient paper. Outside, the rain continued to beat against the window, but inside, time seemed to have slowed down. Elias reached under the counter and pulled out a simple, empty glass jar and a bowl of small, white pebbles. Arthur, Elias began, his eyes sharp behind his thick glasses. The world has lied to you. It has taught you that success is a giant leap. It has taught you that you need a heroic moment to change your destiny. But nature does not work in leaps. A forest does not grow in a day, and a river does not carve a canyon in a week. It is the steady, invisible pressure of time and consistency. Arthur leaned forward, his skepticism still lingering. But Elias, I've tried being consistent. I've tried the gym, the books, the new routines. It's too slow. I feel like I'm wasting my time if I don't see results immediately. If I only improved by 1%, I'm still basically the same person tomorrow. Elias smiled and picked up a single pebble. You are thinking linearly, Arthur. But life is exponential. Let me show you the math of the soul. He dropped the pebble into the jar. It made a tiny, lonely clink sound. If you improve by just 1% every single day, by the end of 1 year, do you know how much better you will be? Arthur shrugged. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times better? No, Elias said firmly. If you improve by 1% every day for 365 days, you will end up 37 times better than when you started. But, he paused, dropping another pebble. If you get 1% worse every day, you will decline almost down to 0. The difference between success and failure is often just the direction of that 1%. Arthur looked at the 2 pebbles at the bottom of the large jar. They looked pathetic. They looked like they meant nothing. But how do I even measure 1%? How do I start when my life feels like a mountain of chaos? Elias stood up and walked toward a shelf filled with dusty journals. He pulled one out. It was small, bound in black leather, and completely empty. He handed it to Arthur. The problem is that you are trying to change your life. Stop. Don't try to change your life. Just try to change your next hour. 1% is not a goal, it is a choice. It is the choice to read 1 page instead of none. It is the choice to walk for 5 minutes instead of sitting for 60. It is the choice to say no to 1 distraction. Arthur took the journal. The leather felt cold in his hands. So you want me to just do something small? I want you to do something so small that it is impossible to fail, Elias replied. The secret is not the size of the action, it is the identity you build. Every time you do that small thing, you are casting a vote for the person you want to become. Right now, Arthur, you have been voting for a man who gives up. It's time to change your candidate. As Arthur walked out of the shop back into the rain, he didn't feel a sudden burst of energy. He didn't feel like a superhero. But for the first time in years, the mountain didn't look so high. He looked at the black journal in his hand and thought about his first 1%. When Arthur returned to his apartment, the magic of the bookstore began to fade, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of his stagnant life. The air in his living room felt heavy. There was a pile of unwashed dishes in the sink, a layer of dust on his bookshelf, and the blue light of his television seemed to be mocking him. For years, this apartment had been a place of comfort, but tonight, it felt like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. He sat at his small kitchen table and placed the black leather journal in front of him. Elias's words echoed in his mind. Do something so small that it is impossible to fail. Arthur looked at the clock. It was 9:30 p.m. Usually, this was the time he would spend 2 hours mindlessly scrolling through his phone or watching a show he didn't even like. 1%, he whispered to himself. Just 1%. He decided that his 1% for tonight would be to organize just 1 drawer in his desk, the junk drawer that had been a mess for 3 years. It sounded ridiculous. A part of his brain, the part that loved mediocrity, started to laugh. Do you really think cleaning a drawer will make you a success, Arthur? You're 30 years old. You need a miracle, not a clean drawer. Just turn on the TV and relax. You had a long day. This was the voice of resistance. It was the voice that had kept him stuck in the same place for a decade. But for the first time, Arthur recognized it as an enemy. He stood up, walked to the desk, and pulled the drawer open. It was filled with old receipts, broken pens, and tangled cables. He didn't try to clean the whole room. He didn't even try to clean the whole desk. He focused only on that 1 drawer. For 15 minutes, he sorted the papers, threw away the trash, and organized the cables. When he finished, the drawer was perfect. It was a tiny island of order in a sea of chaos. He sat back down and opened the black journal. On the first page, he wrote, Day 1, organized 1 drawer. Time spent, 15 minutes. Result, 1% better. It felt strange. He didn't feel like a millionaire. He didn't feel like he had mastered a new language. But as he looked at that clean drawer, he felt a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: agency. He was no longer a victim of his environment. He was a creator of it. However, the victory was short-lived. As he went to bed, the voice of resistance whispered again. "Great job, Arthur. You cleaned a drawer. Only 10,000 more drawers to go before your life matters. See you tomorrow, when you'll probably forget all about this." Arthur closed his eyes, gripping the edge of his blanket. He realized that the 1% rule wasn't a battle against the world. It was a war against the version of himself that wanted to stay small. The question wasn't whether he could clean a drawer. The question was whether he could show up again tomorrow when the excitement was gone. The next day was a normal Wednesday, and normal was Arthur's biggest enemy. The initial spark from Elias's bookstore was gone. The morning was gray, his coffee was bitter, and his boss at the office was more demanding than usual. By 5 p.m., Arthur's brain was a fog of exhaustion. All he wanted to do was go home, order a greasy pizza, and disappear into the couch. As he was leaving the office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Leo, a friend he had known for years. Leo was the king of killing time. They spent almost every Wednesday night drinking beer and complaining about their lives. "Hey man, meeting at the pub in 20 minutes? First round is on me. We need to talk about how much this job sucks," the message read. Usually, Arthur would reply, "I'm in," within seconds. Complaining with Leo was comfortable. It was a way to feel better about his own failures by sharing them with someone else. But today, he looked at the black journal in his bag. He thought about the clean drawer. He thought about the 1%. "If I go," Arthur thought, "I will spend 4 hours talking about things I cannot change. I will wake up tomorrow with a headache. I will be 1% worse." He took a deep breath and typed, "Not tonight, Leo. I have some work to do." The reply came back almost instantly. "Work? Since when do you work on a Wednesday night? Don't be a bore, Arthur. One night won't kill you." This was the social gravity Elias had warned him about. When you decide to change, the people around you often feel threatened. If you get better, they have to face the fact that they are staying the same. Arthur ignored the second message, put his phone in his pocket, and started walking. He didn't go to the pub. He went to a local park. It was cold, but the air was fresh. He sat on a bench and opened a book he had bought 2 years ago but never finished, a book about the history of ancient civilizations. He didn't promise to read the whole thing. He promised to read for 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes of focused, deep reading. As he read, he felt the itch to check his phone. He felt the urge to stand up and leave. But he stayed. He pushed through the boredom. When the 10 minutes were up, he felt a strange sense of victory. It was a quiet, lonely victory, but it was his. He got home, ate a simple meal, and opened his journal. Day 2, said no to the pub. Read for 10 minutes. Result, 2% stronger against the old me. But as he looked in the mirror that night, he saw no physical change. He didn't look smarter. He didn't look richer. He realized the hardest part of the 1% rule, the plateau of latent potential. You are doing the work, but the results are still invisible. You are heating the ice from -10 degrees to -1 degree. It's still ice. But you are getting closer to the melt. 3 weeks had passed since Arthur first stepped into that dusty bookstore. The initial excitement, the high, of starting something new, was completely gone. In its place was a dull, heavy monotony. Every day was the same: wake up, do 1 push-up, read 1 page, write 1 sentence in the black journal. It felt pointless. The 1% rule was starting to feel like a chore rather than a revolution. He still had the same boring job, the same small apartment, and the same bank account. The 37 times better promise Elias had made felt like a mathematical fairy tale. Arthur was in the middle of what experts call the valley of disappointment, the period where you are doing the work, but the results are hidden behind a wall of time. Then Monday happened. It wasn't just a bad day, it was a disaster. A major project at Arthur's office collapsed because of a mistake made by a colleague, but the boss blamed the entire team. Arthur was forced to stay late, enduring hours of shouting and stress. When he finally left the office at 9 p.m., he found that his car had been towed because he had parked in the wrong zone in his morning rush. He had to walk home in the biting wind, his feet aching and his mind screaming. By the time he reached his apartment, he was exhausted, angry, and defeated. "Forget the 1%, he snapped, throwing his bag onto the floor. "I'm tired, I'm broke, and my life is a mess. A clean drawer and 10 minutes of reading didn't save me today." He collapsed onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. The voice of resistance wasn't whispering anymore, it was shouting. "See? The world doesn't care about your little habits, Arthur. Life is chaotic and unfair. Give up. Eat the junk food. Delete the progress. Sleep until noon." For an hour, Arthur lay in the dark, ready to quit. But then, his eyes fell on the black journal sitting on his nightstand. He remembered something Elias had said. "You fall to the level of your systems." Arthur realized that in the past, a day like this would have sent him into a week-long spiral of depression and bad habits. But today, despite the chaos, he had a system. He didn't need to change his life tonight. He just needed to protect the 1%. With a heavy sigh, he stood up. He didn't go to the gym. He didn't write a chapter of a book. He simply walked to the kitchen, drank 1 glass of water instead of a soda, and wrote a single line in his journal. Day 22, everything went wrong. But I didn't break the chain. 1% maintained. At that moment, something shifted. He realized that the 1% rule wasn't for the good days. It was an anchor for the storms. The power wasn't in the progress he made. It was in the person he became by refusing to give up when everything was falling apart. He wasn't a victim of Monday anymore. He was the man who survived it. 2 months had passed. If you had looked at Arthur's life from a distance, it might have seemed the same. He still had the same job and lived in the same apartment. But if you looked closer, into the details, you would see that a revolution had taken place. Arthur's posture had changed. He no longer walked with his shoulders slumped, as if he were carrying the weight of the world. He moved with a quiet purpose. His desk at work was no longer a mountain of chaotic papers. It was a clean, organized space where he practiced deep work for the first hour of every morning. He had stopped reacting to the world and started responding to it. The 1% rule had moved from his desk to his body and mind. 1 push-up had turned into 30. Reading 1 page had turned into finishing 2 books a month. But the biggest change was his language. He no longer used words like, "Maybe, I hope," or "I'll try." He used words like "I will," and "Not today." One Friday afternoon, his friend Leo stopped by his desk. Leo looked exactly the same as he did 2 months ago, tired, complaining, and holding a cup of cheap office coffee. "Arthur, man, you look different," Leo said, squinting his eyes. "Did you get a new haircut? Or did you finally win the lottery?" Arthur smiled, but it wasn't a smile of arrogance. It was a smile of peace. "No lottery, Leo. Just a few pebbles in a jar." Leo laughed, confused. "Whatever. Listen, a few of us are going to that new club tonight. Big party, lots of drinks. You've been a ghost lately. You have to come." In the past, Arthur would have felt guilty saying no. He would have worried about missing out. But now, he had a vision that was clearer than a party. He had a project he was working on, a small side business he had started in that black leather journal. "I appreciate the invite, Leo," Arthur said firmly. "But I have a meeting with myself tonight. Maybe next time." Leo walked away, shaking his head. "You're becoming a bore, Arthur. You're changing." As Leo walked away, Arthur realized something profound. Leo was right. He was changing. And for the first time in his life, being called boring felt like a compliment. It meant he was no longer part of the distracted crowd. He was becoming a stranger to his old self. That evening, instead of feeling lonely, Arthur felt powerful. He went to the park and sat on the same bench where he had struggled to read for 10 minutes. Today, he read for an hour, lost in the world of ideas. As the sun began to set, he decided to visit the one place that started it all. He wanted to show Elias the progress. He wanted to show him the journal that was now half full. But when he arrived at the narrow alley, he stopped. The sign for "The Constant Traveler" was gone. The windows were covered in newspaper. The heavy wooden door was locked with a thick iron chain. The shop was empty. Arthur stood frozen in front of the empty shop. The cold iron chain on the door felt like a punch to his stomach. "It's gone," he whispered. A wave of doubt washed over him. Had he imagined Elias? Was the old man just a hallucination born from his own desperation? He looked at the black journal in his hand. It was real. The leather was worn, and the pages were filled with his own handwriting. He stepped closer to the window, peering through a small gap in the newspapers. The interior was stripped bare. No clocks, no velvet chairs, no smell of vanilla. Just dust and shadows. But then, Arthur noticed something stuck to the inside of the glass. It was a single, small piece of paper, placed exactly where the 1% rule sign used to be. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Elias's sharp, elegant script. It said, "The shop only exists for those who are standing still. Once you start moving, you no longer need a door to enter. The mountain is now inside you." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. He realized that Elias wasn't a shopkeeper, he was a catalyst. The Constant Traveler wasn't a place, it was a state of mind. The bookstore had disappeared because Arthur had finally outgrown it. He had graduated from being a seeker to being a doer. As he walked away from the alley, Arthur felt a new kind of responsibility. The 1% rule was no longer a secret he was learning, it was a power he had to protect. But as his progress became more visible, a new challenge appeared, the trap of success. Now that his life was improving, Arthur was tempted to stop. He had lost weight, his boss had given him a promotion, and he had saved more money in 2 months than in the previous 2 years. The voice of resistance changed its strategy. It no longer told him he was a failure. Instead, it whispered, "You've done enough, Arthur. You're better than most people now. You can relax. You don't need the 1% anymore. You've arrived." This was the most dangerous stage. Most people stop when they see the first sign of success. They reach a comfortable plateau and stay there for the rest of their lives. Arthur sat on his favorite park bench and looked at the sunset. He realized that the 1% rule was not a destination. It was a journey with no end. If I stop at 10%, Arthur thought, I am just a slightly better version of a mediocre man. But if I keep going, who could I become? He opened his journal to a fresh page and wrote a new heading, Phase 2, Beyond Comfort. He decided that from now on, his 1% wouldn't just be about cleaning drawers or reading pages. It would be about seeking discomfort. It would be about doing the things that scared him. A few weeks after finding the bookstore empty, Arthur faced the crossroads. His boss, the same man who had shouted at him during the Monday disaster, called him into his glass-walled office. "Arthur," the boss said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I've noticed a change in you. You're organized, you're focused, and you're getting results. I want to offer you the senior manager position. It comes with a 30% salary increase and a private office." 2 months ago, this would have been Arthur's ultimate dream. It was the big win he had always waited for. But as he looked at his boss, Arthur didn't feel excitement. He felt a cold realization. This promotion was a golden cage. It was the world's way of rewarding him for staying within the system. If he took it, his 1% would belong to the company, not to his own dreams. In his black journal, Arthur had been working on something else, a small digital platform dedicated to teaching people the very history and languages he had once loved. It was small, and it made no money yet. But it was his. "I need 24 hours to think about it," Arthur said. That night, Arthur didn't go home to celebrate. He went to his desk and opened the journal. He felt a familiar fear, the fear of the unknown. If I say no to the promotion, he thought, I am choosing the hard path. I am choosing uncertainty. The voice of resistance was clever this time. It didn't call him a failure. It used logic. Be smart, Arthur. Take the money. Use the money to build your dream later. Don't be a fool. But Arthur knew the truth. Later is the place where dreams go to die. He decided to apply the 1% rule to his courage. He didn't decide to quit his job that night. Instead, he decided to do the one thing that scared him the most regarding his own project. He sent an email to a major investor he had been following, asking for a 5-minute meeting to show his progress. His hand trembled as he hovered the mouse over the send button. It was just one click. It was 1% of his day. But it felt heavier than a mountain. Click. The email was gone. Arthur exhaled a breath he felt he had been holding for 10 years. He realized that the 1% rule wasn't just about habits like drinking water or reading pages. It was about incremental bravery. It was about being 1% more courageous than your fear every single day. The next morning, Arthur walked into his boss's office. He didn't look at the private office or the salary numbers. He looked at the man and said, "Thank you for the offer. But I have a different mountain to climb." He didn't quit his job, not yet. He took a lower-level, part-time role that gave him exactly enough money to survive and exactly enough time to build his own world. He was no longer climbing the corporate ladder. He was building his own. 6 months had passed since Arthur had chosen the hard path. If the first 2 months were a struggle against boredom, the last 4 were a masterclass in the power of the compound effect. Arthur was no longer the man who lived in the shadows of his own potential. He had become a man of action, a man of systems. The investor he had emailed, a woman named Elena who was known for backing only the most disciplined founders, had replied to his message. But she didn't offer him money. Instead, she offered him a challenge. "I don't invest in ideas, Arthur. I invest in people. Send me a report of your progress every Sunday for 12 weeks. If you don't miss a single day, we will talk." In the past, Arthur would have failed by week 3. He would have found an excuse, a headache, a busy day, a moment of doubt. But Arthur had been training for this. His 1% habit was now a suit of armor. For 12 weeks, he worked on his platform after his part-time job. He built the code, he curated the historical stories, and every Sunday at 6 p.m., he sent the report. On the 13th Sunday, he didn't send a report. He received an invitation. He met Elena in a bright, modern office that overlooked the city. As he sat across from her, he realized he wasn't nervous. He wasn't the trembling man who had hovered over the send button months ago. He was calm. He was prepared. "Do you know why I invited you here?" Elena asked, looking at his 12 reports spread out on her desk. "Because of the platform?" Arthur asked. "No," she smiled. "Because of your consistency. Your platform is good, but your system is world-class. Most people have big ideas once a month. You had small progress every single day. That is the only thing that actually changes the world." That night, after signing a partnership that would turn his small project into a real business, Arthur walked home through the same park he had visited when he was at his lowest. He sat on his bench and pulled out the black leather journal. It was almost full. He flipped back to the very first page, to the entry that said Day 1, organized 1 drawer. Time spent, 15 minutes. Result, 1% better. He looked at his life now. He had a growing business, a body that was strong and healthy, and a mind that was filled with knowledge rather than anxiety. He did the math in his head. Elias had said that 1% better every day for a year would make him 37 times better. Arthur realized that the old man was wrong. He wasn't 37 times better. He felt like he was a completely different species. The compound effect hadn't just added to his life, it had multiplied his soul. The mountain he once feared hadn't disappeared, but he had become a mountain climber. He realized that success wasn't a destination he had reached. It was a rhythm he had mastered. But as he closed the journal, he felt a strange sensation. A scent of vanilla and ancient paper drifted through the cool night air. He looked up, and for a split second, he thought he saw a flash of silver, like a pocket watch catching the moonlight, near the trees. Exactly 1 year had passed since the rainy Tuesday when Arthur first entered the bookstore. Today, the sun was shining, reflecting off the glass towers of the city. Arthur was no longer a spectator, he was a leader. His platform, the Daily Inch, was helping thousands of people find their own 1% progress. He was wealthy, yes, but more importantly, he was free. He decided to take a walk back to that narrow alley. He didn't expect the shop to be there, he knew better now. As he reached the spot, he saw that a new, modern cafe had opened where the constant traveler once stood. It was full of people staring at their phones, rushing to finish their coffee, looking for the next big thing. Arthur sat on a bench across from the cafe and pulled out a new journal. The black leather one was finished, stored safely in his home like a sacred relic. He was about to start writing when he noticed a young man sitting on the curb nearby. The young man looked exactly like Arthur had a year ago, shoulders slumped, eyes tired, a look of pure defeat on his face. He was staring at a rejection letter, his hands trembling slightly. Arthur felt a pull in his heart. The 1% rule wasn't something to be hoarded, it was something to be shared. He stood up, walked over, and sat beside the stranger. "The mountain looks high from down here, doesn't it?" Arthur said quietly. The young man looked up, surprised. "It feels impossible. I've tried everything. I need a miracle, or I'm finished." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out something he had bought months ago, a silver pocket watch, very similar to the one Elias used to clean. He handed it to the young man. "You don't need a miracle. You just need to change your next hour. Tell me, if you could be just 1% better today than you were yesterday, would you even notice?" The young man frowned, repeating the same words Arthur had once said. 1%? That's nothing. That wouldn't change anything. Arthur smiled, a deep, knowing smile. That is the secret. The world is built on the whisper, not the explosion. Start small. So small that it's impossible to fail. And never, ever break the chain. Arthur stood up and started walking away, leaving the young man staring at the watch. As Arthur turned the corner, the wind carried a faint, familiar scent of vanilla and old paper. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He realized that Elias hadn't disappeared. Elias had simply moved on to the next person who was ready to listen. And now, in a way, Arthur was a part of that mystery too. The 1% rule was no longer just a math equation. It was a ripple in a pond, a small spark that could start a forest fire of transformation. Arthur took a deep breath of the fresh afternoon air and kept walking. He was a traveler, and for the constant traveler, the journey is the destination.